There is a massive difference between breaking the law and simply discovering a gap in reality where the law does not exist yet. Some of the most audacious heists and bizarre stunts in history were technically 100% legal because nobody had bothered to write a rule against them. Today, we are exposing 50 legendary opportunists who outsmarted the system, manipulated the fine print, and walked away entirely scot-free while leaving the authorities absolutely paralyzed by their own bureaucracy. 1. In 1982, Larry Walters attached 45 helium weather balloons to a standard patio chair, packed some sandwiches, and accidentally floated 16,000 feet into controlled Los Angeles airspace. He paralyzed commercial airline traffic for hours. When he finally crash-landed, the Federal Aviation Administration was furious and wanted to lock him up. There was just one massive problem. They had to drop the most serious charges because there were literally no aviation laws regarding the flight of unpowered lawn furniture. Could you imagine explaining that to a judge? 2. If you break out of a prison in Germany, you will not have any extra time added to your sentence for the escape itself. In the late 19th century, German lawmakers decided that the desire for freedom is a basic human instinct. Therefore, escaping confinement is not technically a crime. As long as you do not damage property, steal a guard's uniform, or assault anyone on your way out, you are legally entirely clear for making a run for it. Would you attempt a perfectly legal prison break? 3. In 2017, the state government of Texas was cleaning up old legislation and accidentally deleted the specific legal clauses that banned the public carrying of large bladed weapons. Overnight, it became completely legal to casually walk down the street carrying a literal medieval broadsword, a massive machete, or a full-sized katana. Frightened citizens called the cops as people strolled into local coffee shops looking like medieval knights, but the police could not legally disarm them or make a single arrest. The law was simply gone, leaving law enforcement totally paralyzed by a massive typo. 4. Patty Roy Bates took over an abandoned anti-aircraft platform in the North Sea in 1967. When the British Navy sent a patrol boat to remove him, Bates literally fired warning shots at them. He was dragged into court, but the judge stunningly dismissed the entire case. Because the fort was situated exactly 7 miles off the coast, it sat safely outside British territorial waters. Bates suffered zero legal consequences for shooting at the military and officially declared his rusty platform an independent nation. 5. Across various affluent parts of the United States, incredibly wealthy individuals completely dodge millions of dollars in residential property taxes using an unhinged agricultural loophole. By purchasing just 1 or 2 exotic farm animals like a cheap alpaca or a miniature donkey and letting them casually wander around their perfectly manicured front lawns, billionaires can legally reclassify their sprawling mega-mansions as active farming operations. This completely legal accounting magic instantly slashes their massive tax burden down to practically nothing, and local city governments are completely powerless to stop them. Would you buy a donkey just to cheat the taxman? 6. In the late 1960s, 2 young men walked into Harrods, the luxury department store in London, and casually purchased a live African lion cub from the pet department. They named him Christian and kept him in their tiny basement apartment, taking him for daily walks down the busy city streets. The police never stopped them, and nobody issued any fines. Why? Because the government simply had not written any legislation banning the ownership of apex predators in densely populated urban centers yet. 7. You might assume that operating any mode of transportation while heavily intoxicated is a fast track to jail, but not if you are riding a horse. In several states, individuals have successfully beaten DUI charges while riding completely hammered. Because early traffic laws were explicitly written to crack down on motorized machines, brilliant defense attorneys have successfully argued that a horse is a thinking animal, not a vehicle. You can technically get away with it because the horse knows its own way home. 8. In 18th century England, you could confidently stroll onto a wealthy nobleman's estate, steal his incredibly expensive, prized hunting hound, and suffer absolutely zero consequences for theft. Under Old Common Law, dogs were officially classified as animals of a base nature. This meant they held absolutely no legal monetary value, making it impossible to charge someone with stealing property. You could take a dog right in front of the local sheriff, and he could not legally arrest you. Have you ever heard of a more ridiculous defense? 9. A clever fisherman in the Pacific Northwest realized that the state's strict fishing regulations explicitly prohibited the use of nets, lines, or spears to catch a specific type of protected fish. However, the legal text totally failed to mention heavy-duty industrial vacuums. He rigged a massive suction hose to his boat and began vacuuming thousands of fish directly out of the water. When game wardens swarmed his boat, they were forced to let him go. Since his method was technically legal by omission, he kept the entire haul while the state scrambled to rewrite the law. 10. When the Postal Service introduced parcel post in 1913, they strictly regulated the weight of packages, but totally forgot to specify what those packages could be. In 1914, the parents of 5-year-old May Piersdorf realized it was cheaper to mail their daughter to her grandparents than to buy a train ticket. They pinned 53 cents in stamps to her coat and handed her to the mailman. No one was arrested for child endangerment because there was literally no rule stating that human beings were not male. 11. For 20 incredible years, the town of Talkeetna, Alaska, was officially governed by a local mayor named Stubbs. The crazy part? Stubbs was a literal orange tabby cat. Because the town was a historical district with absolutely zero legal requirements regarding the species or pulse of its political leadership, the citizens successfully wrote him in on every ballot. He never faced a single legal challenge to his authority and spent his entire career drinking water out of wine glasses and napping in the local general store. Now, that is a politician everyone can actually get behind. 12. In 1980, a man named Dennis Hope noticed a massive loophole in the Outer Space Treaty. The international law explicitly forbids sovereign nations from claiming ownership of the moon, but it says absolutely nothing about private individuals. He filed a formal declaration of ownership with the United Nations. When they simply ignored his ridiculous letter, he began selling lunar real estate. He legally made millions selling completely useless deeds. Would you buy property on the moon? 13. In 2012, a group of teenagers in Belgium realized that while trespassing is illegal, staying past closing time in an IKEA was a massive legal gray area. They hid inside wardrobes until the staff went home and spent the entire night filming themselves having a giant sleepover in the showroom. When they were finally discovered the next morning, the police could not actually charge them with a crime. They had not broken in, they did not damage property, and they did not steal anything. They simply existed. They walked away clean while the store was left totally confused. 14. A retired couple named Jerry and Marge Selby discovered a bizarre mathematical flaw in the Michigan State Lottery. They realized that during specific weeks when the jackpot rolled down, the math virtually guaranteed a massive profit if you simply bought enough tickets. They formed a legal corporation, invited their friends to invest, and legally purchased millions of dollars in tickets. They made a completely legitimate $26 million profit without ever breaking a single rule. 15. A British journalist named Uba Butler created a restaurant listing on TripAdvisor called The Shed at Dulwich. The catch? The restaurant was entirely fake. It was literally just his messy backyard. By creatively manipulating the review algorithm with his friends and posting photos of shaving cream disguised as fancy desserts, he legally tricked the entire system. His non-existent patio became the highest-rated restaurant in all of London. Have you ever trusted a completely fake review? 16. In 2001, lawyer John Keogh filed a patent for a circular transportation facilitation device. He literally patented the wheel. He did it to expose a flaw in Australia's new automated patent system, which had zero human oversight. The government actually granted him the patent, giving him the legal rights to an invention from the Stone Age. While he didn't charge royalties, he proved that the system was so broken, that a computer would legally give you ownership of the most basic tool in history. How embarrassing is that for a government agency? Would you have tried to charge royalty fees? 17. In the 1920s, a charlatan named William Bailey marketed a popular health tonic called Radithor. It was advertised as a magical cure for everything from extreme fatigue to chronic indigestion. The secret ingredient? Distilled water laced with massive lethal amounts of pure radioactive radium. He became incredibly wealthy selling radioactive poison to the public. Because the FDA had not yet categorized radiation as a dangerous drug, Bailey faced absolutely zero criminal charges. 18. Imagine living in an international airport for 18 years because the legal system literally has nowhere to put you. Mehran Karimi Nasseri was trapped in a bureaucratic limbo at a French airport. Because he had no passport, he couldn't be admitted into France, but since he had no official origin papers, he couldn't be deported either. He lived on a red plastic bench in Terminal 1 from 1988 until 2006. Authorities were powerless to move him because no law existed for a man who didn't officially exist on paper. He became a living monument to the absurdity and coldness of international law. 19. Explorer. Tommy Thompson discovered a shipwreck containing tons of gold in the deep Atlantic. Instead of fighting complex salvage laws, he realized the ship was in international waters, outside any country's jurisdiction. He used an obscure finders keepers maritime doctrine to claim hundreds of millions in gold bars for himself. By the time governments and insurance companies tried to intervene, Thompson had already secured the legal rights to the haul. He outmaneuvered the world's most powerful lawyers from the bottom of the ocean using ancient maritime codes that everyone else had forgotten. 20. In the 1920s, a man named John Brinkley made an absolute fortune by surgically implanting goat glands into human men. He aggressively claimed it was a miracle cure for aging and a lack of vitality. He had absolutely no legitimate medical degree, and the science was complete nonsense. However, because medical advertising laws and surgical regulations were practically non-existent at the time, he legally broadcasted his absolute quackery on massive radio stations and walked away a millionaire. 21. In 1994, a man named Uzi Nissan registered the domain Nissan.com for his small computer repair business. Years later, the massive Japanese automaker decided they wanted it and sued him for millions. Because it was his actual birth name, and early internet laws had zero rules against cybersquatting, the judge ruled entirely in his favor. A single guy legally forced a multi-billion-dollar global corporation to use a different web address. Would you stand up to a massive corporate army? 22. During the chaotic early days of the internet, a man decided to list his own immortal soul for auction on eBay, just to see what would happen. Because e-commerce was practically the Wild West, absolutely zero regulations governed the sale of imaginary items. Incredibly, the bidding war actually reached $400 before panicked administrators shut it down. They were legally forced to write a brand new corporate policy stating users cannot sell human souls. What would you sell online? 23. In 2015, a New York lawyer named Richard Luthman was tangled in a bitter civil dispute and officially requested to settle the matter via trial by combat. His legal reasoning was absolutely flawless. Because the entire New York legal system is based on old British common law, the state had never explicitly drafted legislation outlawing medieval sword fights. The judge actually had to formally review a motion allowing two men to duel to the physical end over a simple paperwork dispute. Insane. 24. In 1977, the town of Vulcan, West Virginia, desperately needed a new bridge, but the state government completely ignored their pleas for funding. The town's brilliantly petty mayor realized there were absolutely no laws preventing American municipalities from directly requesting foreign aid. So, at the height of the Cold War, he legally applied for a massive infrastructure grant from Soviet-backed East Germany. This humiliated the state legislature so profoundly they immediately rushed the cash. 25. Back in 18th century England, there was a morbid financial loophole where it was perfectly legal to insure the life of a complete stranger. Because the insurance industry had not yet invented the concept of insurable interest, people would literally buy massive life insurance policies on sick celebrities. It effectively turned the legal system into an unregulated betting market where wealthy citizens gambled on the exact date someone would expire. Have you heard of a crazier side hustle? 26. A college student named Jack Sweeney made headlines by creating a simple automated bot that tracked the exact real-time movements of Elon Musk's private jet. Despite the billionaire offering him cash to stop and threatening massive legal action, Sweeney was completely protected. He was simply utilizing publicly available aviation data provided by the government. Because there were no specific privacy laws protecting broadcasted flight paths, he legally held a billionaire hostage on social media. 27. In 1997, a man named Gregory Nemitz officially filed a claim of ownership for an entire asteroid called 433 Eros. When NASA landed a probe on it, he sent the federal government a formal bill for a $20 parking fee. You might think he'd be arrested for fraud, but he wasn't. Because the Outer Space Treaty only prevents nations from claiming space, his claim as a private citizen sat in a massive legal gray area. He spent years in court fighting the government over a parking ticket for a rock millions of miles away, and he never paid a dime in legal fines. 28. In 2005, a university student named Alex II was desperate to pay off his college tuition, so he launched a brilliantly simple website called the $1 Million Homepage. He sold advertising space for exactly $1 per pixel. Because internet commerce was still incredibly unregulated and there were zero complex digital advertising laws to navigate, companies flocked to the novelty. In less than 6 months, he completely sold out the page and legally walked away with over $1 million. 29. In 1962, a wealthy businessman named Lamar Hunt desperately wanted to build a massive new sports stadium, but the local government repeatedly denied his zoning permits. Refusing to accept defeat, Hunt discovered a bizarre loophole in the city's urban planning codes. The codes freely allowed for the construction of large-scale amusement parks. So he legally built an entire functioning theme park next to his desired location, classifying the stadium as a secondary attraction. Genius move, right? 30. Have you ever noticed that old cartoon characters always sing incredibly weird public domain songs instead of the traditional Happy Birthday tune? For decades, the publishing company Warner Chappell fiercely claimed a strict copyright on the song. They demanded hefty licensing fees, legally collecting millions of dollars in royalties every year. They got away with this massive corporate shakedown simply because nobody had the funding to challenge them, until a judge finally stopped it in 2015. 31. In 2017, a man named Nick Stafford was so furiously annoyed with his local DMV that he paid a $3,000 vehicle tax using exactly 300,000 loose pennies. He rolled them right into the lobby using 5 massive wheelbarrows. The DMV staff was absolutely livid and tried to refuse the petty payment. However, a federal statute strictly dictates that coins are legal tender for all public charges. They were legally forced to count every single cent by hand. Would you try this? 32. In 2011, an Austrian man named Nico Alm decided to test the absolute boundaries of religious exemptions by wearing a plastic pasta strainer on his head for his official driver's license photo. He claimed he was a pastafarian and it was his sacred headwear. The authorities desperately wanted to deny the ridiculous photo and penalize him. But because there was no specific legal framework officially defining what constitutes a legitimate religion, they were completely paralyzed. He got the ID. 33. Imagine casually importing fully functional military-grade fighter jets and storing them at your local civilian airport. An American businessman named Don Curlin did exactly that. He legally purchased multiple Soviet-era jets from overseas. The federal government panicked, but there was absolutely no law preventing a private citizen from importing foreign military aircraft, as long as the weapon systems were removed. He legally built his own private air force and nobody could legally stop him. 34. In the 1930s, cartographers created a completely fake, non-existent town called Aglo on their maps as a clever copyright trap. Years later, a guy noticed the town on the map, drove to the empty dirt road, and legally built a real general store right there, naming it the Aglo General Store. When the original mapmakers tried to sue a rival company for copying their fake town, they instantly lost the court case. The fake town had legally become real, and the store owner faced no penalties. 35. The iconic yellow smiley face was created by an American artist who never bothered to trademark it. In 1971, a French journalist named Franklin Loufrani noticed this massive legal blind spot. He simply registered the trademark himself in Europe and began charging licensing fees. Because international copyright laws were incredibly slow and uncoordinated, he completely stole one of the most famous designs in human history without breaking a single rule. He legally made absolute millions from it. 36. In 1991, a guy named Paul Glover wanted to bypass the federal banking system, so he just invented his own physical currency called Ithaca Hours. He printed thousands of bills and convinced his entire New York town to use them instead of standard US dollars. The Secret Service heavily investigated him for severe counterfeiting, but he was legally cleared. Because he explicitly did not call them dollars and people voluntarily accepted them, he completely circumvented federal money laws unpunished. 37. During the 1960s, the British government held a strict, boring monopoly on radio broadcasts, refusing to play modern rock music. Music executive Ronan O'Rahilly bought a massive ship, anchored it in international waters just outside British jurisdiction, and blasted rock music directly into London. The government was furious, but totally powerless. Because he was broadcasting from the open ocean, he successfully bypassed all federal communication laws without facing a single penalty. 38. A man once had his car towed illegally by a private company from a parking lot. Instead of paying the massive $300 fee, he waited until the tow yard was closed, used his spare key, and simply drove his car through the gate. He was eventually charged with theft, but a judge dismissed the case. Why? Because you cannot legally steal your own property. Since he owned the car, and the tow company didn't have a legal lien yet, he walked away scot-free while the tow company was left with a broken fence and zero cash. Do you have a spare key ready? 39. A man named Tony Borglum purchased a decommissioned 60-ton military tank and casually parked it right on his quiet suburban street. The Homeowners Association and local police force were absolutely furious. They desperately tried to tow the massive armored vehicle and heavily fine him. However, city traffic codes only restricted commercial trucks from residential parking, not literal military tanks. He left it parked outside with zero consequences. Could you imagine living next to a tank? 40. In 1994, a group of brilliant engineering students secretly constructed a highly realistic, full-sized police car on the highest, most inaccessible roof of an MIT campus building. The campus police were absolutely baffled and wanted to press severe charges. However, they quickly realized they could not legally arrest anyone. The students had not stolen a real car, nor had they damaged any school property. Because there was no law against building a fake car on a roof, they walked away clean. 41. In 2015, a Kentucky man noticed a neighbor's camera drone hovering directly over his backyard, invading his privacy. He grabbed his shotgun, blasted the expensive machine out of the sky, and was immediately arrested for discharging a weapon. However, the judge was forced to entirely dismiss the criminal charges. Why? Because the federal government had never actually drafted a law defining where private property airspace ended and public drone territory began. The police were completely powerless to punish him for defending his yard. Would you shoot down a flying spy robot over your own house? 42. Imagine getting pulled over by the police while driving a literal military tank to the grocery store, and the cops cannot legally write you a ticket. In the United States, there is absolutely no federal law preventing a private citizen from purchasing and driving a demilitarized combat tank on public streets. As long as the main cannon is permanently disabled and you install rubber pads on the metal treads to protect the asphalt, it is legally classified as a standard vehicle. Authorities just have to sit there and watch you parallel park a 60-ton armored beast outside a local bakery. 43. An artist named Michael Townsend discovered a hidden unused structural void inside a massive Rhode Island shopping mall. He hauled in furniture, tapped into the electricity, and secretly lived inside the mall for 4 entirely rent-free years. When security finally discovered his luxurious secret apartment, they desperately wanted to throw him in jail for severe trespassing. But they could not. Because the specific empty void was never drawn on the official municipal blueprints, he wasn't technically inside the legal boundaries of the property. The police could only ask him to politely leave. 44. A brilliant driver in Ohio was slapped with a massive speeding ticket but completely refused to pay it. Instead of arguing about his speed, he brought a typography manual into the courtroom. He proved to the furious judge that the town's speed limit sign was officially printed in the wrong font, completely violating Federal Highway Administration guidelines. Because an illegally manufactured municipal sign cannot legally enforce a traffic law, the judge had to dismiss the entire case. The police were outsmarted by a literal font choice. Have you ever beaten the system this brilliantly? 45. In 2011, a Texas man named Bill Robinson legally stole a $330,000 mansion, and the police could not do a single thing to stop him. He utilized an obscure, centuries-old legal doctrine called adverse possession. Because the massive house was abandoned by a bankrupt company, Robinson simply filled out a $16 courthouse form, moved in his furniture, and hung up no trespassing signs. The local authorities were completely powerless to arrest him for squatting because his paperwork was technically flawless under state law. 46. A frustrated commuter in Washington state was completely tired of sitting in brutal rush-hour traffic, so he strapped a highly realistic cardboard cutout of a popular actor into his passenger seat and merged into the carpool lane. When a state trooper finally pulled him over, the driver legally fought the expensive ticket and won. The state's archaic traffic legislation only vaguely required a secondary occupant in the vehicle, but totally forgot to specify that the occupant actually had to be a living, breathing human being. The stunned judge had to let him walk away without a fine. 47. A passenger at a major international airport caused an absolute scene when she tried to board a commercial flight with a massive, fully grown peacock perched on her shoulder. The airline staff was incredibly furious, but the federal transportation laws at the time were written so vaguely that they only specified the allowance of emotional support animals, with absolutely zero restrictions on the actual species or size. Law enforcement could not arrest her, fine her, or legally confiscate the giant bird. The airline was legally bullied by a peacock until they finally rewrote their rules. 48. Casinos will go to absolute extremes to convince the public that counting cards at the blackjack table is a massive, highly illegal crime. If security catches you, they will immediately drag you into a back room and permanently ban you from the property. But here is the massive secret. It is completely, 100% legal. There is literally no federal or state law that prohibits a citizen from using their own mathematical memory to outsmart a game of chance. The police cannot ever arrest you for simply being too smart for the casino's own good. Would you try this mental heist? 49. A citizen in Vallejo, California, was so completely exhausted by the city ignoring his pleas for a safe pedestrian crossing that he bought a bucket of highly reflective paint and perfectly painted his own crosswalk in the middle of the night. The city council was absolutely livid and wanted to charge him with severe vandalism and destruction of public property. However, they quickly realized there was no specific municipal code prohibiting unauthorized street painting at that exact unclassified intersection. He entirely avoided prosecution, and the city actually left the crosswalk there. All right, we have covered 49 unhinged cases, and only one remains. But first, it is time for the final verdict. We are handing the award for the most legendary move to Michael Townsend, the man who lived in a secret mall apartment for 4 rent-free years. Why? Because turning a forgotten structural void into a luxury home simply because it didn't exist on any blueprints is the ultimate urban heist. Do you agree with our pick? Or did another case deserve the crown? Let us know in the comments. And now, for our final number. 50. In 1859, a bankrupt businessman named Joshua Norton lost his mind and publicly declared himself the absolute emperor of the United States. Instead of throwing him in an asylum, the police literally saluted him in the streets. Because there was absolutely no law against peacefully pretending to be a monarch, he faced 0 legal consequences. He printed his own fake currency, which local businesses gladly accepted, and dined at the finest restaurants for free. He lived a highly respected, luxurious life of royalty entirely because the legal system had no rule against playing make-believe. These stories prove that our legal system is often just a fragile collection of accidental typos and forgotten rules. It turns out that society is governed by whoever reads the fine print most carefully. If you found a legal loophole to get rich, would you use it? Tell us in the comments. Subscribe for more mind-bending stories. We will see you in the next one.